my pleasure to welcome you to Adath Yeshurun's 2020 5781 Yom Kippur Forum, Feeling Safe and Welcomed at Adath, Security and Anti-Racism. I'm Riv-Ellen Prell, a member of Adath and the Adath Anti-Racism Committee. As you may know, this forum was pre-recorded and being live streamed for the first time prior to the last hours of prayer and fasting on Yom Kippur. It will be available thereafter on the synagogue's website, and we hope will be viewed widely. This forum is co-sponsored by Adath, the Adath Anti-Racism Committee, the JCRC of Minnesota and the Dakotas, and the Jewish Community Action. Though we are closed out of our building for reasons of responsible public health for many months, we continue to anticipate our return to the communal life of services, learning, and the work of the synagogue. That return will raise questions about how we will create a safe environment for all Jews, recognizing that we do not all experience what makes us feel secure in the same way. In particular, we need to learn from Jews of color in our community, or our guests who are people of color, about how they are affected by the presence of armed agents. We look forward to creating a conversation on the panel and then in our community about what are the best practices to create a safe and welcoming environment. We have invited 4 people to participate in our forum who approach the issues of safety and security in the synagogue from different perspectives. We look forward to hearing from each of them, and then they will engage in conversation with one another. It's my honor to introduce them now in the order in which they will speak. They are Dudley Deschamps-Coles, co-chair of Adath's Anti-Racism Committee, Rafi Forbush, teacher at Heilicher Jewish Day School and youth director at Beth Jacob Congregation, Dan Plekkenpol, director of Community Security, JCR Minnesota and the Dakotas, and Rabbi Harold Kravitz, Max Newman Family Chair in Rabbinics at Adath Yeshurun Congregation. I want to begin with Dudley, and the question we'd like Dudley to answer is, you have been important to many of us in Adath and beyond in describing your experiences of security and the synagogue. We invite you to tell us about that now.
So my experiences as a person of color, Jew of color, at Adath has been an interesting one in that while I see attending synagogue or Saturday service as a place to escape from a long, laborious week, to escape and go in and have fellowship with fellow congregants and to offer a prayer and whatnot in a peaceful, tranquil place, while at the same time having a sense of anxiety and fear as I just turn on the bend and approach the main entryway, and I see Adath up ahead, and next to it a marked vehicle, and security or officer vehicle is there. Then the sense of anxiety kicks in. But then rehearsing in my mind, and as I sit there, it's like, okay, before you step out, make sure you have your kippah on, and you made sure you dress appropriately and respectfully and whatnot, so you're good there, and just walk up. And at the same time, hoping that I see someone that's familiar, a familiar face, so that maybe I can walk with them, so that I know if I enter this tranquil place, that I am either be a guest or I have a pass. My passport is next to me, which would be the person that I know. And then to walk in, and then I see an armed guard in full uniform. Again, the anxiety kicks in. I'm rehearsing in my head, all right, don't make any suspicious moves or movements, or don't act anything that would maybe make you stand out or maybe trigger a response from the officer. while at the same time realizing I know why they're there. Given the events in Pittsburgh and in Poway, California, that I see why it was necessary that, you know, that we upped our level of security. So it was a little bit of a dueling battle in my mind and in my heart. And, you know, one, knowing that this person that's armed guard is to protect me and look out for me and look out for my fellow brothers and sisters. But at the same time, that I can also be seen as a target, a perpetrator, just because of what I look like. And of course, I can't help to not think that. I understand I'm a respectful person, I'm educated, I make decent money, I'm a hard worker. I try to be a good Jew, but at the same time, there's this layer that can sometimes evoke negative feelings in people, or where I'm constantly inundated with images and reminders of either be the media or a newspaper article, like, you know, the likelihood of me getting shot by an officer is much higher than any other race. So it's only natural that I have these in my mind while I'm going into a place of tranquility and peace, a place of worship at the same time, thinking of that. So that's been my experience. The one thing that strikes out, and so maybe somehow make it a little more personal and for everyone who's listening can understand, and making it more close to home. I recall a time, one Saturday morning, when I was entering the synagogue. As you know, we have to put in our code. I always make sure I know my code. I don't want to stop and fumble around and like, no, I know my code, just to give the impression that, yes, oh, he knows what he's doing. He belongs here. He's putting his code in. Okay. So we're walking into synagogue. I meet a family, a couple of friends of my husband and I. And the husband and I, we walk in, put in our code, come into the side door of the synagogue, and the wife kind of trails behind, and she meets another family and starts talking. They stand basically outside the synagogue, or the entryway, and other people are coming in, and then someone begins to hold the door. Now the husband and I were already up ahead, and I'm watching this happen. At the same time, in the corner to my left, I see the officer. Of course, I already thought in my mind, oh, I'm in the right, I'm okay. I came in the appropriate way. I came in the right way. I came in how I was supposed to come. Everyone should be coming in. But then the wife finally comes in with the other family. The officer comes down, it's like, hey, how about you guys not stand there and just keep going so that, you know, we prevent you from wanting to hold the door for people, because, you know, it's a habit, we want to do that, but we know why we can't do that. And the wife had a funny look on her face, a look of displeasure, a look of like, do you not know who I am? It's not like I'm a stranger. And it wasn't, she didn't say it outright. We could just see it in her face, just not pleased by this. Like, you know, I'm a member here. Like, how dare you? We continue walk, make our way to the sanctuary, go and worship. We sit together, doing our davening. Then she turns to me. So, how did you feel when the security guards started to make presence here at the synagogue? This happened at the same time frame, just not too long ago. There was an incident with the security guard, a sense of displeasure, and at that moment realizing your privilege, either it be because you're a woman or the fact that you're a legacy here or that you're white or what have you. And then that same breath later on, you turn to me and ask, how did I feel? I should be asking you, how did you feel? But the point here in her asking me that, I was struck by it, and that as a member of the community, I don't recall no one ever asking me how I feel. What were my thoughts in having a security guard marked? No one asked for my opinion. But at that time, before all that has transpired with George Floyd and whatnot, I second guessed myself. Like, who am I? Like, I should just take this. I'm no one special. If I don't feel comfortable, so be it. But at least I keep showing up, but still half-heartedly, while being happy to be there, but at the same time, scared for my life.
Thank you, Dudley. So, Rafi, for many years now, you've written and spoken about your experience as a Jew of color, and you've also worked professionally in Jewish schools and now at Beth Jacob. Tell us about some of your experiences, and also, we know you've given some thought to different models for security in our synagogue and elsewhere. We'd like to hear about that as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I share, Dudley's, overall point, and I think we all have our own experiences, and they leave a mark. They leave a mark on your memory, and it's something you don't want to happen to yourself, obviously, but I think we're at a place where we don't want this to happen to other people. My experience was more that I wrote about when I first started doing some public things about this. Was about being followed, actually, from getting out of my car, walking into the synagogue, tallis in hand, high holidays. But the officers that were sitting in the parking lot, as they watched people pass by, there was no issue. But as I passed by, walking alone, late, whatever, um, they got out of the car and they followed me all the way into the building until the usher, who happened to know me, and usually at those times it could be a variety of volunteers because everybody's there, happened to know me and basically gave the officer a thumbs up as they were giving me a hug. And I can only imagine what it would have been like for me to walk in there and not have that thumbs up from somebody. But those type of situations, they play a toll. And I think growing up in the Jewish education system, there was never a lot of people who looked like me that would understand if I had an issue like that. And so it was always kind of a very isolating feeling. And this isn't something that just happens at my synagogue. This is something that happens especially if you're a guest at another synagogue. And just the common ground there is kind of needing to have to prove myself when I walk in the door. And then let alone if there's a community or another city I try to do that in. For me personally, I don't feel comfortable to make that choice to go to a different synagogue out of this city because I know for a fact I'm not going to get a thumbs up from anybody. And that's tough. But I think that especially with what's going on, the idea of officer in front of the synagogue can really trigger people currently. But these issues aren't aren't new. These issues have been around for a long time. And we're talking about things within our own community that we can improve. And one of those things is trying to figure out how we can be delicate with both. I've had some experience with some security stuff at the day school, and I have a lot of experience being a Jew of color. And this last couple of years has really helped put it in perspective of how this can really be done in a way that's delicate for why security is there and why it's so important, and what we can do to help make other people feel like they belong. Okay. And I think part of my idea is adopting like a person, so to speak, that continues to come to this job as the security guard for whatever the synagogue or organization, and becomes a community member by just being there. Um, Somebody who can be maybe armed and plain clothed, conceal their weapons so that, you know, there is somebody in the building who can serve the same purpose as a police officer. But I think we could probably keep the police officer further away from the front door so that they're a presence to the people that need that presence. But once you're there, we have security and people who are familiar with our community. Um, my like perfect vision of that is like after Shabbos services, the armed guard is out there hanging out. There's kids. They don't even know that this person's armed, and then another member is bringing them a plate of food from the luncheon. Uh, that's the kind of adoption there that I'm talking about of relationships between why they're there and also knowing the people. And I think that's the major piece that our community is struggling with. Is we actually just need to do better of getting to know each other and understanding that these things are happening, and that's not a poke or a jab at people. That's just the lived true experience that people are going through, and we just want to address it and see what we can do to just bring some peace to that. And I think a lot of people are struggling with, well, what are Jews of color and things like that. And I ask the same question. Ultimately, I think we're working to a point where we can all just be um, Jews together in the same spot. And I see security being a piece where we can trust that system so that we can all be in the synagogue together for to to celebrate Shabbat and the high holidays, and let those people do their job. And having worked with Dan Plekkenpol, I know that our community is in really good hands, and it's so I look forward to hearing more from him. So thank you.
Thank you, Rafi. Dan, given your long experience with policing and your current position with the JCRC, tell us about your philosophy of balanced security. In particular, how are we as a community to see ourselves as, you put it, in charge of our security?
Thank you both to Dudley and to Rafi for their input. It really adds a lot to what I'm going to say, and I'm going to be able to help unpack maybe from a law enforcement perspective and a perspective of being, an officer for 30 years before I came to the JCRC 2 years ago. I had worked with the Plymouth Police Department for 30 years in a lot of different capacities there, and then my last 10 years as deputy chief. That being said, there is a specific balance that we want to achieve in the JCRC, and that balance for security is to have a philosophy of having a warm and welcoming environment at the synagogues and institutions that we work with. Now, we give recommendations, we work with security, we give consultation, and it's really up to the separate synagogues and institutions how they want to have their security. But we certainly like to be and want to be that voice and that trusting voice for recommendations for what can be done and maybe more creative things that could be done for our security. But that being said, and I think Dudley had brought up the word of comfort. And comfort is security. When we talk about security, we talk about comfort. They go back and forth. We just don't always talk about physical security and having a guard out front and what alarms we have and what codes we need to push in. It really gets down to whether or not people feel comfortable. And that goes towards, the concept of law enforcement being that officers don't always recognize, and this comes down to training, but officers don't always recognize the awesome responsibility that they hold in the positions, and especially when wearing a uniform. Now, they wear the uniform every day at work, patrol officers. They get extremely used to it. Most people don't even have an engagement with a police officer maybe once in their life, either stopped or they come to their home and even actually talk to a police officer. So the police officers aren't even, I think, sometimes even realizing the effect that they have in standing in front of a location with a uniform and understanding that people are walking up to them and actually not feeling comfortable, with their presence. Obviously, people can't be mind readers, but I mean, that gets into training though too, and how officers present themselves and how they can help to, I guess, dissolve and to create a more warm and welcoming situation. That being said, going with balance, we have to kind of reimagine and be creative. And I like what Rafi was putting, about his input as being creative and how we can reimagine and how we can develop different kind of security platforms, like using ushers and greeters, and using our staff in the synagogues to help with that security. There's a balance to have with this. And that would be, you can always hire, a police officer in uniform, but sometimes we don't always think about hiring that officer and asking or making the request. And you can do it to have them there in plainclothes and come with an unmarked police car. So there is that option. Also, you can have congregants do the security, as well, just so they're trained and they feel comfortable with that type of training. And they know what they need to do for the synagogue, and obviously calling 911 if there is that time of emergency. So it's really up to each, synagogue of how they want to view what their security will look like. So when I was at Plymouth, I always kind of imagined the police job as a business, and the citizens being customers. Now, when you own a business, you just don't make up your own policies and run that business and be hopeful that it's going to be successful. You ask your customers what they want. You ask your customers what they need. And that input is so important in law enforcement and also in security. Now, over the years, law enforcement has become a lot more progressive than what people think they have. Many years ago, when I had first started with law enforcement, it was very closed, as in the public really had zero input in how police departments were run and or operated. Nowadays, the veil is being taken down a lot more, where police departments are beginning to have citizens academies. They have community citizens groups that have input in how the department is run. They also have input on how officers are being hired. So that's very important. There's still a long road to go in law enforcement. Is there a change needed? Yes, I think there's a way we can reimagine how law enforcement can be done and created in our community. But with that, if we think about our synagogues being many cities, we need to also give that input then to law enforcement of what the needs are and to help educate law enforcement on what they need to know about the Jewish community and about other communities as well. Now, we've done quite a bit of training with the JCRC with different groups. We've got a training that it's called What You Do Matters, Lessons from the Holocaust. This is a group that we brought up from Arizona. The Arizona Prosecutors Association has this fantastic 4-hour course, and we've done it 4 different times so far for law enforcement last year. Due to COVID, we can't continue with it now because it's an in-person course. But they will come up and they'll talk about World War II and police officers and how they were pulled into the Nazi regime and what it meant to the Jewish community and how the Jewish community, even back then, viewed officers in uniform. They really didn't see a difference between the police officers and the Nazi party, because they both wore uniforms and they both represented the same thing. And that continued on and on until today within the Jewish community, that presence of a uniform. But for the officers to know this and to see this and have a better understanding of this is really helpful. We've got another program that is going to be launching fairly soon that actually is accredited by the Minnesota Post Board, the Police Officer Standard of Training, that will be offered to police departments, talking about different faith group communities that will be able to talk to the officers in a panel to tell them what they need to know and what they can expect from their different communities. So a lot of it lies within training, and a lot more of it lies especially within hiring the right police officers to do the job. And that's something that we're continuing to work for as we progress and as law enforcement goes forth. See if I missed anything here. I guess the main message that I'm going to end with is this: we can really help, and we, meaning the Jewish community and synagogues, can really help to shape what security looks like in our different synagogues and institutions. There's a lot of great different ideas. And, me having 30 years of experience, I've got ideas, I can have some creative ideas, but it could be that one person. It could be a 15-year-old, it could be a 10-year-old that comes up with this idea that none of us even imagine. They say, what if this, right? And I think that with Adath having this group talking about anti-racism and bringing up ideas, digging deeper into this issue will bring up ideas that nobody thought of. And it could be a standard. It could be something that is spread across the community. So I think that we all need to be open to what this can look like in the future and what our comfort and security can mean to different individuals within our houses of worship.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Rabbi Kravitz, we've heard tonight briefly about some different models for security and the importance of deciding what's best for our synagogue. And tell us a little about what you, our clergy and staff, hear from congregants about this issue. What are you hearing? And what might be some of the ways that we can address this as a congregation in the future?
Before I do, I want to come back, Dudley, to the very powerful story you told about preparing to enter Adath. And when I heard you tell the story previously, you said something that it was very striking to me. You said you would sit in the parking lot and you had to prepare to enter white space. And I just want to ask you if you would talk about that piece and what that meant and how you understood it. And then I'll come back and answer Riv's question.
Okay. What I meant by the white space in that, knowing that I'm outnumbered. I live, it's fact. You could look this up, you can Google it, Wikipedia it, or whatever, that I live in a state where the majority race is white. You're over 90%. Even within the first ring cities, like I'm in New Hope, to know that of like what last census 2010 is about a little over 21,000, and to know that over 90% of that is white. So I know that that I'm going to be entering another white space. But interestingly enough, to know that Jews, as I see as white, don't consider themselves white. But that's another discussion. So knowing that I've had past experiences and knowing that I've always entered white spaces. I've always been the only one. I've always been the first. I've always been, the odd one out. Didn't matter if it was in Florida or Chicago or even here. Even as, I advance in education and in career, it gets wider and wider. And then to throw in religion or culture, however you see it, or for me as a religion, that is very white in itself as well. So,
Yeah.
so
I
with
think a lot
that,
of our people will be shocked to hear you say that. Because I think, often Jews don't think of ourselves as white. We think of ourselves as Jewish, right? In the census, we debate what to say. So,
I think it's more, leaning in a sense of the visual. Like, I cannot truly say that I'm colorblind. Like, Dan is white, Rev is white, Harold is white to me. Just as much as when you see me, there might be some hesitation to even say it, but it is fact. I'm Black.
yeah. Yeah, no, I thank you. And I think you open our eyes, all of us listening, in a way that there's a lot about this conversation, and even in anticipating it, that I think will come as a surprise to a lot of our people, that these are issues. And this is a good time to be doing this, when we're doing the work of cheshbon nefesh, of soul searching, us who we are and how to be our best selves, opening our eyes to things that we just haven't seen that are hurting people, in doing damage, especially unintentionally, is really important. So we're so grateful to you, Dudley, both for co-chairing the Anti-Racism Committee and being on it along with Riv-Ellen Prell, and to you, Rafi, for your experience and your work at the day school and at Beth Jacob, where you're a longtime member and describe that experience. And to Dan, to you, for all the work you've done in such a thoughtful way. It is really striking, to come back to Riv-Ellen's question, how differently people perceive issues, the different kinds of needs, and we're trying to balance all the time in synagogue life, and two Jews, the rest of that expression. But I think the thing that's most profound is just the lack of awareness that many of our people have. They have no idea how the presence of a patrol car, or a car that looks like a patrol car in front of the building, or an armed guard, a uniformed armed guard, how differently it lands on people. I think I know that there are many people who, after the attack on Pittsburgh, felt like it was critical that we had that kind of security that was visible, specifically visible, that a police car looking, even if it was not real looking car, would just kind of have somebody to turn around and go the other way. An armed presence would have the same effect. There are a lot of people who, I said, they wouldn't walk into the synagogue if it wasn't there. We know there are other people, not of color, who found it distressing that I think we all found it pretty distressing that we'd gotten to that point. But then, there's the way in which people, anybody who comes to our synagogue, member or guest, Jewish or not, feel that Dudley and Rafi described so powerfully. And it's really important for our people to hear that and start to wrestle with that. And Stan, I think, pointed out clearly, there is no one way to answer these questions. The question is, how do we wrestle with it? I know, Rafi, you were involved in security at the Highlander Day School, at the JCC. And so you were part of a process. And Dudley, I think, our Anti-Racism Committee is going to help us start to really think about these questions and open people's eyes. And I don't know the answer, but I think this is a very important part of raising awareness and trying to figure out how to address these concerns that are real and for many people in our community, not apparent. So we're so grateful to you all.
So we have time for a little bit more conversation. And so let me first ask the panelists if you have any questions for one another. And if you do, good. And if not, I have one more question I'd also like to ask each of you. So having heard one another, does anyone have any additional comments that they'd like to make or ask one another any questions?
I do have a comment, and Rafi had brought up a word that stuck with me, and he talked about security being delicate. Very good word to use. I mean, we always use the word balance, but delicate might even be better, because we really need to take a look at it and stand back and think about what we're doing and not just do it and run ramshot over people that could have feelings, right, when they see armed security in that. So I think we need to be more mindful when we're working with security and working with programs like that. Now, obviously, you know, with ushers and greeters, when they get trained, you know, the training is suspicious indicator recognition is what we do. We focus on behavior and not on looks. You'll be way more successful in your security and focusing on behaviors and things that aren't fitting in the behavior than what people look like. They got to get beyond the looks. So that would be very important. And private security can also be hired, and they have some of that training too. So I liked the word delicate, Rafi.
Thanks, Dan. And I was going to say, I was raising my hand to say, actually, I was going to just say something about what Dan said, which is training and hiring the right people who have gotten that training can provide that space that I'm talking about, where you then have a relationship, because we walk in and we see a person who is there to protect us, who then can build a relationship and every week is there. And instead of Dudley having to prepare to walk into his own synagogue, now all of a sudden it's an interaction that he might look forward to, because he knows exactly who it's going to be and exactly how the interaction is going to go. And so I think trying to break down those barriers of saying it's somebody else's space, I think that's what we're trying to break that down to, a place where it's all of our space, including security. It's just a balance, and having this conversation and having this platform, like you said, is extremely important and helpful for everybody to further understand a little bit more in depth.
I have a question for you, Dan, to put you on the spot, but I understand that a lot of the companies that provide, the private companies that provide security that can be hired, often promote themselves as hiring off-duty police people. And, you know, I think at a time, there was a time when that would have come across as a great asset. Given what's been going on, people may not react as positively to that as they might have in the past. I'm just curious about your response to that concern.
Sure. Well, there are some, you know, we work with several private security companies, and over my time with JCRC, you know, we have discovered that some companies obviously do a better job than other companies. And, you know, there's a company or two that we are at a point now that we feel very comfortable in recommending, because they have received that suspicious indicator recognition assessment type training, and we know how they work with their customer group. So that's a good thing. Now, you know, sometimes to have the right amount of training, if you're talking about either congregates carrying firearms or private security carrying firearms, or law enforcement being there, law enforcement is obviously better trained when it comes to firearms, and to there's a whole myriad of issues of why. It takes too long to even get into that. But that being said, there are other avenues and other options besides, you know, hiring law enforcement on a contractual basis. Obviously, you know, we at the JCRC believe that law enforcement is a relationship that we wish to continue, because they still are our law and order, our law enforcement for our communities. If we have emergencies, they're the people that we're calling to come and help. But that being said, I think that there are private security companies, and how they do their business, they do it very well.
Can I just add on as well, is that, like, I think having a private security company in there and in our own space, they're going to still need somebody to call, and those are, the police are those people. And I think having that kind of plainclothed armed guard presence is, again, that relationship piece. They are there if the police officer outside doesn't deter whatever the threat is itself. And then, but they are there to respond. And I mean, I hope we don't get to a point where community members are doing that for themselves or at all. I don't think that's what Dan's trying to say, but like, to let them do their jobs. They know what they're doing. They're with the right training. That's why we would hire them. So.
wanted to just ask, obviously I'm not an expert in the area of security, much like Dan and Rafi, but coming in the perspective as a consumer, as Dan so eloquently put it, in that I just want to be able to have some sort of relationship, or either it be control or somehow to try to, some way of desensitizing those negative feelings, and how and when I see someone in a uniform or uniform guard, especially again going into a place of tranquility and worship, to see that. So for me, I guess the option that would work, like say for someone like myself, or I'm sure for other Jews of color, if you had an officer, or either be a liaison or some kind, at least knowing who they are. Like if it's someone who's going to be there permanently every Saturday morning, somehow either it be, hey, Officer Joe Smith here's his face, is what he looks like, his background or whatever, or even just a picture, or a meet and greet for those people in the community who are sensitive to officers. You may have to make a special accommodations, like, hey, even if it's just one person of color in your community, in your congregation, and still have the connection in the way to try to desensitize those feelings, so that if and when I go to synagogue, I see him or her, I know them. I'm no longer in a defense mode, and that I hold the cards because I know who you are. I recognize your face. Now I have the power back. Like, I am a member here. I know who you are. Hey, Tina, blah, 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 and whatnot. Or even if I was not even chummy with them, but at least I know who they are. Well, and it's up to them to want to get to know me or not, but at least I'm in the position of power in that I know who this person is. I know I don't need to feel a sense of feel threatened by them. I know why they're there. They're here to protect me.
Right. You bring up a great point, Dudley, and you just kind of put the golf ball on the tee for me. Before I left Plymouth, I had an idea that I brought forth, and this is an idea that I would challenge your committee to bring forth to the Minnetonka Police Department. I know their chief well, and I can connect you. That being said, the idea was we had officers. It's an odd connection, so bear with me. Predatory offenders in every city have to be checked on an annual basis. Okay, and each city has more predatory offenders than you think they do. Our investigative unit was charged with that, to go out and check up on all these different predatory offenders, take their photographs, see if they're living at the right place, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, that's a lot of people to go through for our detective staff. It took a lot of time. What they were doing is then they gave these predatory offenders to officers. Each officer would maybe get 2 predatory offenders that would be their 2 people that they would check up on every year. The officers know that person knows the predatory offenders. Well, I came up with the idea before I left is, if we're doing this for predatory offenders, why can't we have officers, 1 or 2 officers, adopt a house of worship? That is their place that they patrol around. That is their place that they can park their car and do their paperwork. That is a place when they're working a day shift, they stop in and they talk to the rabbi. They come in and get a cup of coffee. They can stop by on Saturday. I mean, it becomes basically adopt a house of worship, right? And those are your 2 officers. You know their names. You know, they'll give you cell phone numbers. You know who to call, right? They can come to a meeting and talk about the different issues that you may have and talk about sensitive issues with you. I think it's my idea, but I like the idea because it really adds responsibility, accountability, and they have ownership over that church. Now, officers are built in a certain way that if they have ownership over something, nobody is going to do any damage to that building. No one is going to do any damage to my congregates. That is my place, and it's going to be secure. And they end up owning that. And then this great relationship that gets built. is phenomenal, right? And it gets to be your guy or your gal that, you know, that comes and does your security there. And it's a neat relationship to have. And it really breaks down those barriers between law enforcement and the community. And then you have an opportunity during these meetings to have input and invite your officer every, you know, time you guys have a meeting, whether they can make it or not. But I mean, that's right. So I would like to work with you on that to see if maybe we can have that happen with Minnetonka. It'd be great to pilot that in a way. You know, it really doesn't do anything but
I
have
like it.
officers
I
that are
like it.
committed to it to say, you know what, I'll volunteer. And the people who volunteer have a heart to do it too, right? So, I mean, I think that could go a long way. So this is just an example. It looks like to our viewers that this is a setup, but it wasn't, right? That the conversation that can happen and the ideas that can spur up are, you know, could be endless, right? So that being said, I think that's something we can work on together, and we can move forward to, I guess, reduce fear and bring more comfort.
Thanks, Dan. So let me pose a question, and we might have time for at least one or two responses to it. Because I think what we've done in this forum is really talk about people's experience, what it feels like, whether it's comforting, as Rabbi Kravitz mentioned, or the tremendous challenges for Jews of color members, and as we can anticipate, the guests. But the next step is really, how do you make this a communal conversation? How do you bring together in the synagogue, for example, or in a school, the people who have a strong sense of wanting maximum comfort, and people who need a more delicate, a more complex set of relationships. So if we maybe have time for one comment, one idea about whether in a congregation as large as Adath or in other kinds of communal settings in the Jewish community, how do we start that conversation with people who might look at things rather differently? Any suggestions about what that might look like, either on Zoom or face-to-face at some point?
I think I'll speak to that real quick. I think we already started the process, so I can't really give, you know, what's next. But the very fact that we're even having the discussion now, bringing it to the forefront, forcing people to truly introspectively think about what they can do and what is the exact problem. Like the fact that we've already created a spark just having the discussion now. So that's progress in itself to me. And then also, even for myself, as a member of the community, doing my part, showing up and putting my skin to the game and doing my part.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more comment about how all of us should put our skin in the game. What would that look like in the context of a synagogue or another communal institution? Any other thoughts on that?
Oh, I think I'll just say this quickly. I think ultimately we're talking about relationship building, and we need to get to know each other better, not just member to member, member to leadership, members to security, and that whole kind of environment. And we just need to slow down and just start knowing each other a little bit better.
Thank you. So let me, on behalf of Adath, thank Dudley, Rafi, Dan, and Rabbi Kravitz for bringing your own perspectives, your own positions to this conversation. And let's look forward to a new year of health, of a better time, and one that will foster all of these conversations. And we are very happy to share this with larger communities and look forward to your feedback whenever you might see this. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.